Booksy, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here for the second video in the series where I'm going to be reviewing all the books that have won the ManBooker Prize in its history. Today we're going to talk about The Elected Member by Bernice Rubens. And this book, this is my copy, and I love this cover, I love the book, and I have a lot of notes. So I'm going to just give you a quick brief synopsis and then we'll go into some of the themes that are explored here. The main character in this book is Norman Zweck, and he's from a Jewish family living in England. He's a 40-something-year-old man who seemed to have had a brilliant career as a lawyer, but through experimentation with drugs, and over the course of the novel we get to see why he started experimenting with drugs, but he hasn't been able to cope with the chemical addiction, and so he's now at the place where he's psychotic and he has visions and he's not really sure how to separate what he sees and what really exists. So at night and sometimes during the day, he sees these silver fish that are crawling everywhere, and he's convinced that there are fish living on the walls and in the floors and in his bed, and he can't convince other people that they're real. And so his father, who's a little unwilling to accept Norman's illness, tries to cure him of it in many ways. Norman lives in this house with his father. His mother has died, and when she died, she left him her side of the bed as a legacy. This of course harkens back to the time when couples slept in separate beds, maybe in the same room, but there's this bed, and it's a huge bed, and it's meant to be joined together for a man and his wife to sleep together. But on her deathbed, Norman's mother bequeathed her half of the bed to her son. This is her inheritance. And so now Norman inhabits his parents' room in his parents' house, and his father has moved back to the single room that Norman was inhabiting while he was a child. So Norman lives in this house, and he's saddled to this bed, which is his mother's legacy. His slightly younger sister also lives in the house with them. Her name is Bella. And there is another sister, her name's Esther, and she lives elsewhere. And over the course of the novel, we see that Esther has married someone who's not a Jew, and because of that, she was excommunicated, she was disowned from the family, and so she lives on the outskirts. And if any of this sounds familiar to you, it is because there are a lot of biblical themes that are explored in this book. The fact that these characters are Jewish, there's a lot of discussion about Jewish heritage, the fact that we meet Norman having inherited this bed, and with it all of the relics and all of the sacraments, and indeed all of the weight of the Jewish history and Jewish ancestry. The fact that in the Jewish culture and Jewish religion, or culture, not sure which, the fact is though that person inherits their Jewish heritage from their mother, and so it's important that Norman has inherited this bed, which really is the cause and also the way that we see the symptoms of Norman's illness. There's a lot of discussion in this book about faith and belief, faith and fantasy, faith versus hallucinations. One thing that I really want to point out is eventually Norman's father, the rabbi, because he is a rabbi, can't have a Jewish story without a rabbi, and his name is Rabbi Abraham Zweck. But someone posed a question to the rabbi about why he believes in God as opposed to believing his son's story. If his son had come to him and said that he'd seen a miracle, if he'd seen something that was evidence of God, wouldn't he believe his son? So why would he believe something that has no evidence if it's biblical, but not believe Norman's story? And throughout this book we get this issue of questioning how much of what we question is real. How much does religion require us to suspend our belief? And if we are believers in one sense, what makes us skeptics in another? The book also explores in a big way the pharmaceutical industry and the role of government in treating people. So the fact that this novel is titled The Elected Member, elected meaning chosen, who are the chosen ones? And that theme of chosen, a person who's a sacrifice, a person who represents a group, a person who's nominated to serve on a committee, it has so many meanings, and the author, I think, did a brilliant job of exploring lots of different ways that we could look at this person who is elected. So in the Jewish sacrificial system, there's a day when sinners would come together and confess their sins and lay all their sins on the head of a scapegoat, and that scapegoat would be sacrificed. They'd be sent out to live in the wilderness, and that Azazel is mentioned in this book. And indeed, that scapegoat is compared to Norman's character. And while Norman was supposed to represent the hope of his family, and maybe even the hope of his generation and the hope of his culture, because he was supposed to bridge the gap between the immigrant Jews and those who took their rightful place in this new society in England. The fact, however, is that Norman instead represents all the negative characteristics, all the secrets of his family. And so in exploring his family life and flashing back and meeting his mother and her domineering characteristics, and the fact that they refused to allow Norman to really explore and express who he was, we see Norman instead being the representative of all of those hidden dark secrets that have come to light, all those things that Norman would do in the quiet dark space of his room behind closed doors. The fact that here on this cover we see Norman in bed means that all those things that should remain hidden are coming to light and are being exposed to us. Can you tell that I love this book? I love this book. Another thing that I wanted to explore, and I hope that those of you who know this history a little bit better will comment down below and let me know what you know about it. In the period leading up to the 1970s in England, I think is during the time when the National Health Board was being established, and people who might not otherwise have been able to have access to certain pharmaceutical drugs are now getting access because of the public welfare system. And I think that through this book, I think the author explores a little bit of that and calls to mind the role of government in how people get access to things, and whether the government should be held responsible for what they have brought to our tables. If you know a little bit more about that history of England and the history of the structural change, maybe the changes that led to the establishment of that NIH, NIS, the system that provides the welfare for people. If you know a little bit more about that, leave me a comment down below, explain that to me. But overall, I thought that this was a brilliant novel. There's a lot of discussion about responsibility and blame in this story. And when Norman is sick and he's been confined to his bedroom for several days, the rabbi is so concerned about who is providing the money for Norman to get drugs, who's providing the drugs, and worrying about where Norman is getting the money from. But even when his own role in providing Norman with these resources is exposed, he seeks to cast off the blame onto other people. And I thought that that theme, that exploration of casting off responsibility, finding someone to serve as a scapegoat, finding someone to be the sacrifice, sometimes just because you refuse to acknowledge that you are the problem. I thought that that was such a fascinating plot and subplot in this book. So I love this book. If you've read it, I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about this book in the comments. This is the second book that won the Booker Prize. The author is Bernice Rubens and she's from Wales. And I thought it was significant that the second winner of the Booker Prize was female. So this is the 1970 winner, the elected member. One of my goals this year is to read and review all the books that have won the ManBooker Prize in its history. This is the second book, so there's a playlist I've created where I'm going to be linking all the videos where I've reviewed all the books. So stay tuned for more of these videos coming soon. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to chat with you about this book or other Booker Prize winning books that I'll be reading and maybe you've already read, and we can discuss down there. So until next time, happy reading. Bye.